So item number 8 on the agenda is 155 Potter Street. And Liz, you're going to do it?
Thank you, Chair. Can I just check everyone can hear me? Perfect. If you wave your hands if there's any problem moving forward, please. Evening members, members of the public. So agenda item 8 relates to the change of use from a use class A4, which is a public house, to use class F1, which is a multi-faith cultural centre. And that's along with the retention of the first floor 2-bedroom flat and the removal of the existing porch. So the application site extends to 0.17 hectares. It's on a vacant public house site, the White Horse, on the eastern side of Potter Street, opposite the junction to Church Street. The pub has been vacant for approximately 2 years now. The site is not listed, it's not in a conservation area. Potter Street and Church Street, whilst relatively narrow roads, do not have any traffic regulation orders in place, so therefore there is the ability to park there insofar as you have tax on your car as such, and it's not in the flood zone, so it's pretty free from constraints from a planning perspective. Turning to the application details, as I said, the public house is currently vacant. The application states that the existing facility is to relocate the Northbrooks Pavilion site elsewhere in Harlow. The plans with that show that the main hall there being 77 square metres. The proposal is to open 7 days a week between the hours of 10 in the morning and 6 in the evening. There is a main meeting hall at 62 square metres, which has a capacity to seat 50 people. And there are 3 further small meeting rooms in the building. The details with the application state that approximately 20 people will use the building on a normal day, but on Fridays between 1 and 2, there could be a larger number, possibly up to 80 people for weekly prayer. The first floor flat is proposed to be maintained and occupied by the site manager and potentially used by anyone coming in to do teachings or sessions within the centre. There's 7 car parking spaces proposed. There were changes to the application from when it was originally submitted, with all the parking originally shown to be at the front. Comments received from Essex County Council Highways that some of those parking spaces were located on land outside the ownership of the applicant, and therefore the amended plans came in to show parking to the rear of the building, access to the north of the site. 6 of those spaces would be standard spaces, which are proposed to be to Essex County Council parking standards in terms of their size, with a further 1 space as a disabled bay. In terms of the external works, there is proposed to be the removal of an existing porch and the creation of a new porch. Internally, the changes are quite minimal, save for the removal of an internal wall to make the larger meeting room ground floor, and I'll show you a plan of that shortly. So this is the aerial image of the site. You can see the application site with the arrow, just a wider context plan, so you can see it's at the southeastern side of Church Street. You can see the prevailing character of the area, which is predominantly residential in nature. I think it's also worth pointing out that within the vicinity there's no public car parks that are accessible by the public, so if you're parking and visiting anywhere in the area, then predominantly you would use on-street parking. Just turning to some photos, and you can see in the top left of the screen, you can see the direction of where the photo is taking. So you can see in this photo here, just behind where the car is parked, that would be the access into where the parking spaces are proposed, which is in what was the rear garden of the public house. So originally they were proposed to be on the site frontage. This is just from the Church Road, Potter Street Junction. This is approaching north. You can see the public house on the left-hand side of your screen. And it's worth just noting the relatively narrow nature of Potter Street in this location. But as you can see, there's no parking restrictions in place on the road, and the majority of the properties have limited but some on-plot parking. And then just taking a view from the south. And this is further back from Church Road. And again, you can just make out the narrow nature, and just behind where that photo is taken, there's a further church there that obviously has some limited parking. So turning to the existing and the proposed site plan, I say this is the updated site plan. You can see on the left, that is the existing, and on the right, you can see what is proposed. and the exception is just a removal of the porch and a new porch, but you can see the provision of the 7 parking spaces access within to the side and the rear of the pub, the former pub. This is the existing and the proposed ground floor plans, and you can see there's very little interior change with the exception of the removal of the internal partition on the left-hand picture to make way for the larger meeting room and meeting space and study room. In terms of the first floor plans, that's the 2-bedroom flat, and that's proposed to be retained as existing. So you'll see that there's very limited interior changes to the proposed building, and likewise for the exterior. So these are existing elevations, and those are the proposed elevations. Turning to the key issues, just to update members and those in the audience, you will see that there's been some additional representations that have come in since the publication of the report. Those are contained on the supplementary sheet that is available. There's been a further 3 objections received today. No new issues are raised in any of those objections that have come in since the report's been published that are not contained within the committee report available. So the issues are as stated in the report. So the key planning matters, so they're detailed in your report from pages 15 through to 19. So turning to the principle of development, policy L2 of the local plan supports community facilities where it would benefit local and the wider community. The existing use is a community facility. The proposed use as a multi-faith centre is also a community facility. So in terms of the principle of development, there's no conflict with policy insofar as matters of detail can be resolved and are acceptable to the local planning authorities. So officers consider that there is policy compliance with policy L2 of the local plan. Turning to parking and highways, 7 spaces are proposed. Essex parking standards would require 20 spaces for the community building based on the floor space created, plus a further 2 for the flat, amounting in 22 in total. So there's an under-provision of parking spaces when tested against the Essex parking standards guidance. Now, we accept as officers that the existing public house would also under-provide when having regard to parking standards, and that's not uncommon for such facilities in urban areas. But the concern of officers is that the intense use of this, having a generation from a much wider area than what potentially a local pub would have a much greater impact on the parking provision requirement and the local road network surrounding, which I said is relatively narrow. So there's going to be potentially a greater influx of parking and cars accessing this site, with potentially up to 80 vehicles at one time if they have the maximum of 80 people visiting and each person coming individually. There's no public car parks in the vicinity. As I said, the roads are narrow, there's no parking restrictions. We haven't had with the application any transport management plans submitted to understand how they could potentially deal with this influx with traffic. And there's no cycle parking proposed. So having due regard to the context of the site and the prevailing character of the area and the nature of the use, officers believe that there's conflict with policies Iron 2 and Iron 3 of the local plan. Turning to the impact on the neighbours, and that deals with both noise, both the use and the parking. There's been no evidence received with the application to understand how that would be dealt with by any potential future occupants, and with the potential large volume of people attending the site, with potential comings and goings at set times in the day, which then potentially there could be an impact on neighbouring residential amenity. And therefore, officers believe there's conflict with PL2 of the local plan in that regard for the reasons as outlined in the report. Turning to biodiversity, as the proposed parking is going into the rear garden area of the former public house, there would be a requirement for a biodiversity net gain assessment to be undertaken, and that policy is contained in PL9. That hasn't been received during the amendments to the application, and therefore there is a conflict with that policy in the local plan as a technical reason. There's trees on site. Officers, the site would not adversely affect any trees on the site, and it's within flood zones, so lowest risk of flooding. So there's no conflict with those matters. Just turning to the policies and the local plan that are listed in the report. So policy Iron 2 relates to parking, and I've highlighted the two subsections of that policy that officers feel there would be conflict with this proposal, which is subsections A and B, which is the impact on highway congestion and the detrimental impact of safety of highway users. And Iron 3 is the parking standards policy. Now, there is flexibility. We can operate flexibility with that, but we believe that in this instance there is such an under-provision that there will cause conflict in the local area. Turning to policy PL2, which is the amenity policy, it's subsection G, which is a compatibility and sensitivity of adjacent users, where we believe, with the absence of information before us, there is conflict. And policy PL9 on your screen just deals with the biodiversity. So to summarise, the principle of development officers welcome, it's a community use that officers would look to support, but there are some deficiencies and some technical deficiencies within this application that officers believe cause conflict to the policy, and having due regard to both the letters of support and the letters of objection and the statutory consultee responses, officers believe that the disbenefits would outweigh the benefits in this case, and the recommendation, therefore, members, is one to refuse for the 3 reasons as listed in your report and on the screen. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you very much. So we come to the speakers. I've got no particular order. I've got Dan Ricketts. Would you like to come forward? And if you press the right-hand button, it should turn red.
Is that working?
Okay. You've got 3 minutes.
Working. Is that working? You can hear me? Yes?
Only just to hear you, yes.
Right. Thank you very much for your time this evening. I'm going to bring it a bit closer. Okay, right. So, as a resident of Potter Street and a neighbour of the White Horse, I'm here to speak in objection to the application, specifically in relation to parking and traffic impact. As residents, we've been concerned about the potential number of cars at the site, and with no details of what parking is likely to be because of no travel plan, on August 24th of this year, a group of us visited the Northbrook site where the applicant group is currently based to observe parking. Please remember the application makes provision for 5 visitors' cars. At 1:30 p.m, during the main Friday prayer gathering, it was noted that over 50 cars were parked at and around the site, with more arriving continuously. It is fair to assume none of these cars were residents, as no houses are within 100 metres of the site. The neighbouring park was only occupied by 2 adults and 3 children. A resident of Hare Street reported, "This is a quiet day. Sometimes the cars are parked all the way down Harbert's Road." Clearly, the parking problems will create if transferred to Potter Street are obvious. It is an access point into the town from the M11, with buses passing the White Horse every 6 to 7 minutes, large numbers of cars, vans and HGVs. Additionally, it would be a primary access route for emergency services to the villages to the south-east of Harlow. Potter Street is in fact narrower than Harbert's Road by around a metre, being a road that predates Harlow Newtown and is something of a commuter rat run. On this stretch of Potter Street, there are no traffic calming measures, and vehicles often exceed the 30-mile-per-hour limit, which was recently observed by Essex Police, who caught 7 speeding drivers in 20 minutes at 8 p.m. in the evening. There have been 19 reportable accidents on Potter Street in the last 24 years, compared to 7 on Harbert's Road for the same period. If the 50 or 60 cars from Northbrook were to park on Potter Street, the overspill would be immense, around, I think by my maths, 1,000 times the planned parking capacity. The planning application worryingly suggests cars should simply park on the common or on the main road. In this scenario, Potter Street could be reduced to one single carriageway. If this parking coincided with St Mary Magdalene Church being used for a wedding or a funeral, there could be over 100 cars trying to park in the local area, which would simply create misery and danger for local residents, commuters and the emergency services. The planning application mentions using minibuses, but there was no evidence of this on the day we visited Northbrooks. Once a year, the Potter Street Community Fete draws hundreds of people from a wide area and does cause some traffic difficulties and parking issues. However, this is one afternoon of the year. These parking problems would exist every week and, to a certain degree, every single day if planning were granted. When religious festivals occur, it would be reasonable to expect these issues would persist for longer periods and in greater numbers into the evening, when accidents are far more likely due to lack of light. There is no possible way the parking at this place can be made for the intended purpose to work, and I urge you to reject the planning application. Thank you very much.
Just on. Thank you. Rob Mortello, sorry. And you've got 3 minutes.
Good evening. The letter from Metwater Solicitors and Mr Gavin's committee report articulate the majority of problematic issues in relation to this planning application. To support this, I'd like to add my own comments about the total lack of data or information accompanying this proposal. The applicants would have known that applying to convert a property used as a public house for over 200 years into something completely different would, quite understandably, cause anxiety and apprehension to the neighbouring community. Before making their planning application, a responsible organisation, let alone one claiming to be for the community, would have arranged a meeting with the neighbours to listen to their thoughts, answer their questions, and hopefully do their best to allay any concerns about the new project. A responsible applicant would have sought a pre-application meeting with the council to use their experience and guidance as to how best to approach their objective. Neither of these were done. With attendances on some days approaching 100 and only 7 car parking spaces, the applicants would have known of the significant parking issues that would be created around the neighbourhood. A responsible applicant would have therefore commissioned a parking or traffic impact study by a professional independent body, the results of which would either support their application or at least inform them as to the issues they faced in order to plan for them. This wasn't done. A considered planning application would have included survey data on how many people actually attended their own current operation over recent weeks or months, or the number of cars that converge at their existing sites, so that those considering their planning application wouldn't have to guess or speculate. This wasn't done. Given their proposed site would be open outside business hours 7 days a week, a responsible planning application would have commissioned a noise pollution study to allay neighbours' concerns. This wasn't done. The council and neighbourhood cannot and should not be expected to make a decision on a planning proposal based simply on guesswork alone, and yet this is exactly what this application is expecting us to do. In summary, and in my opinion, the total lack of data, evidence, details, facts or figures accompanying this proposal fails to meet even the most basic level of diligence or credibility, and as such must be rejected. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Tyler. Susie Grady, come forward. Got 3 minutes. Go.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, brilliant. So the main areas I would like to talk about are antisocial opening hours, noise, and the lack of engagement with Essex Police. So I've lived on Potter Street for over 20 years, and my parents both lived on Potter Street for 45 years until their recent deaths. So I know Potter Street, the White Horse pub, and large sections of the local community. We are a quiet residential area who have a strong sense of community and look out for one another. The White Horse pub has never been a Wetherspoons. It had a maximum of 10 people visiting most nights, and these nearly all walked from along Potter Street. There was no music, no noise, no shouting, no disruption, because if there was, it was dealt with very swiftly by the landlord. Policy PL2 of the local plan seeks to protect the amenity of existing residents. It is considered that the likely intensity of activity at this relatively small site, set at the edge of a residential area, has the potential to significantly distract from neighbouring residents' living conditions, resulting from excess parking and also from the use of the building itself. In order to determine noise impact, we would need listening equipment installed at the current Northbrook site to determine noise levels on a 24-hour basis, including at Ramadan. Because Muslim prayer times for Harlow, taken last week on the 4th of September, are starting at 5:09 in the morning and going through until 9:17 p.m. at night. So it is the case that prayer times can be very early in the morning and late at night, with associated car noise, doors slamming, people talking whilst we are trying to sleep. It is noted that the existing Northbrook site has a comparatively much larger parking area, and it is set away from the nearest dwellings. It's approximately 100 metres from the nearest house. However, the current site is less than 20 metres from the nearest house, and so residential amenity would be adversely affected. Policy PL1 relates to a safe and secure environment which helps to reduce opportunities for crime and minimise the fear of crime. The previous site, Northbrook site, was the victim of an arson attack. There has been no consultation about the risk of arson and how this will be minimised at the current site, how locals will be kept safe and how local property will be kept safe. Essex Police have suggested that they would like to meet with the applicant to discuss security provisions and how the applicant intends to keep future users safe. This has not occurred. Because of this, we recommend that the planning application is refused. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've got Georgina Beecham. Like to come forward, please. Thank you. Again, you've got 3 minutes.
I'd just like to start by saying I don't know any of the parties involved in the application, and I've only spoken to Mr. Alley on Sunday and Tuesday, but I'm here to recommend the proposal. The main issue seems to be with the parking. Potter Street is actually predominantly single-line traffic with people pulling over to allow others to pass due to the parking outside houses, etc. The Baptist Church has an attendance of approximately 150 people for its Sunday service, but only has around 8 to 10 parking spaces, and actually advertises on the website that parking is available on local streets. Mary Magdalene Church has virtually no parking to facilitate its services. The community centre again has no parking facilities at present, and yet the hall is available to hire for up to 150 people. The area outside of the site is one of the few places where 2 cars can actually pass each other on Potter Street, and surely this could be adapted as it works for the rest of Potter Street. I know that there's also a proposal for 38 parking spaces, a new car park for next to the community centre that could also be used. The environmental health issues, the non-sensitive neighbours. Obviously, the pub was built in 1848, so all current residents have knowingly moved into an area with a public house. And surely a community centre you would hope would have less noise than a public house. People have queried the number of attending and that no evidence has been given about these numbers. But if there's no evidence given, how do we know that the numbers will be larger and not smaller than the current 80 that are predicted? People have put the location being near the M11 will bring cars from afar. Why? The community centre is there for the local area, not to bring people in that will be coming along the M11 purely to visit. It was recommended that maybe you could share existing faith buildings. Both the faith buildings nearby are Christian and therefore may not serve the whole community. It was pointed that there was no public transport. There is actually a bus that travels along Potter Street that runs to Epping train station, tube station, with routes obviously into London if people would need to, and runs to Harlow town. Personally, I've lived in Potter Street area for 31 years, and when I first saw the post, I initially thought it was to help the application. It was only upon reading the comments that I realised that in fact it was to oppose it, with comments on Facebook such as, it will be the beginning of the end of Harlow, and that the date of the meeting, being 9/11, the day that America was attacked by Muslim extremists, might be significant. When I commented on these, I was told I was thick as shit, and if I wanted to live in a multicultural area, I should move to Tower Hamlets. Now, I believe that the introduction of a multi-faith centre should enhance and enrich our community, not divide us.
Thank you very much. Mohammed Ahmed. You have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So the issues that everyone's saying about parking and whatever it may be, it's not the prayer section of this community centre that's going to be used mainly on Friday. That's when we're going to have most people there. It's only going to be for a matter of 15 to 20 minutes. So if there is going to be people that are going to be parking on the street or whatever it may be, it'll only be for 15, 20 minutes. The church opposite there on a Sunday, they have a lot more people, and they have people parking along that street all the way up to the Miller and Carter. We're not suggesting anything like that. If there are any other concerns that everyone has, like the gentleman before said about the lady said about the noise and everything like that kind of thing, or we should have sat down with the community and spoke to them about what is required. This place is actually going to be open for the community, not just a group of people in the community. When we were growing up in Harlow, we had different places that we could go to, or have different organisations that could meet up together. Certain charities come in there for help and whatever it may be kind of thing. So we want to be able to let every member of the community, not just of the Muslim community, Southeast Asian community, whatever it may be, any faith they are, if they want to come and use the space, that's going to help benefit our community and tie in our community together, make our community stronger, because Harlow is more diverse than people think. And I think this is why somewhere like this will be good, and it'll be a good way for everyone to interact and get to know each other better, and get rid of any misconceptions they have about each other. The comments like the person before that said, this meeting being held on 9/11, I've heard those comments today as well, earlier. So those sort of negative comments aren't really good for community cohesion. Like I said, I'm born and bred here. Yeah, I've never had any issues with anybody like that, and then I want our community to be able to mix with everybody. So the main issue that's coming out is mainly about parking. Yeah, that pub wasn't very busy. If we didn't think about finding somewhere permanent that we can have a wider reach for the community, yeah, we would have stayed where we are. But at the same time, we can't develop where we are. Yeah, so this is what I'm saying. With the parking issues, they can be resolved, and it's only going to be a question of 15 minutes to half an hour max. Yep. Okay.
Thank you very much. Mohammed Islam Ruman. It's 3 minutes.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen and others. I've got declare a conflict of interest before I proceed with my submission. I am the current chair for Essex Police Independent Advisory Group for Professional Standard Department. I live in Harlow. I also vice chair Harlow Police Independent Advisory Group, which I have chaired for the past 5 years. So I know a lot of councillors in here and a lot of people that are sitting behind me. So if anyone have any objection for me to proceed, please do so, then I wouldn't speak. If no one has any objection, I would like to go ahead in favour of the application. So we're talking about a multi-faith or a faith place of worship where we've had a public house, which generally seems to be more noisy than the place of worship, in my opinion, as well as all the stats suggest. And the parking issue that's been raised is rightfully addressed by the speaker before me, the lady behind, which were the same thing I was going to come up with. In the meantime, I had a conversation with the leaders of the Masonic Hall on the street. They have sort of showed interest to accommodate some of the parking for the worshippers on Fridays. So that's on the plan, as well as the public road in there. The bus runs all day long. People will be travelling by bus. That's what I've been told when I spoke to the applicants group, as well as they are in a place, they're trying to have carpool system in place. As you would know, most of the worshippers that's attending the mosques are pretty much in the age when a lot of them do not drive. They've been taken by their sons or their relatives. So carpool system is going to be in place. Parking, the way it's been portrayed by the defending group, is not going to be as bad as it may sound like. Besides that, the main issue I'm going to address is the level of hatred being put against this Muslim community.
Can we not go down that route, please?
Absolutely. But it's got to be reported. So I'm not going to go much more details into that because the application, in my opinion, was a bit weak. It did not cover every single aspect that need to be covered, which I have had a conversation with the architect himself. I hope the applicants group go ahead, do their work again if it's not successful at this occasion, and come back with that credible plan that will be accepted to everybody. But that's my submission, but I see nothing wrong in accommodating another place of worship within the Harlow. And I want to end it with one quote, which is from Sir Frederick Enric Gibbard, which he says is on top of our Harlow local development plan that currently stands from 2020. He says it describes Harlow as an organization which would go on changing and being rebuilt as the needs of the people altered. And we want to see that's happening, not halt the application. Thank you.
Martin Patty, yeah. Yes, I'm the agent and architect for this proposal. The public house is a community asset and will continue to be a community asset with our client's proposal. The pub has ceased trading as a public house, mainly due, I think, to COVID, the change in the drink and driving laws over the past 50 years, and also the loss of smoking within pubs. It is not now viable as a public house, and we think it needs an alternative use. This will be a cultural centre for all faiths and religions, and this, although this is generally for the Bangladesh Islamic group, it will be used for all other faiths as well. They currently use the Northbrooks Pavilion in the centre of Harlow, but we understand that our clients only have a short lease on this site, as this will soon be redeveloped, and hence the need for a permanent site. It is not going to be a mosque, as many of the objectors have stated. The proposal, therefore, is to provide a facility which will be open 7 days a week to local residents of all faiths, to provide a meeting place for residents, a place for teachings, prayers and seminars for all religious groups and individuals. This will be a building open to all people and all faiths, and it has 4 different meeting rooms for that purpose. It will be a quiet, sensitive use and will have a reduction of noise from the previous use. Although one of the objectors said that it was a very quiet pub, that may have been in the past. If it was open again as a pub, it could be even worse, a lot worse than it used to be. This will be a sensitive, quiet use. Parking has been stated as being a big issue, and we agree that there possibly is less parking space than is needed, but it is more spaces now than the previous pub. We've got 7 car spaces in the rear, and although we didn't show it on the plan, because the frontage of the pub can accommodate another 5 or 6 spaces, but we understand that's highways land, but there's no reason why that couldn't be used for parking as well. I think the important point to make is that the only intense use on this particular proposal is for 1 hour on a Friday, when there will be up to 80 people coming. 1 hour, that's all we're talking about, 1 hour. The rest of the week will be a very quiet, low-key use. There's no restrictions on the roads. There's right next to Harlow Commons, so it can cope with overspill parking. And it is, in my view, no worse than the existing pub use when it would be busy. A lot of the people will come in a car, and it won't be 1 space per car. It'll probably be 4 spaces per car vehicles. Okay. And also, I think you need to also mention that it's probably no worse than overspill parking for the church. We think it's an important facility for Harlow and for the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Members, questions and clarifications? Okay. Oh, turn that. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. I have a few questions, predictably. Okay. Is that any better? Is that better? Okay. A few questions. 1 or 2 of which you may feel you have already dealt with, but just for the sake of clarification, let's go over them. First of all, a really easy question. How many objections were actually received? because the number was increasing daily. So I'll just do them one at a time, if that's okay.
So turning to your report, so on page 12 of your report, we've lodged 129 objections in the report and 139 letters of support. Now, what we've done is we had numerous, in some instances, we had a number of repeat objections and support from the same individuals. We count that as one representation. But for the purpose of the report, I've also included towards the bottom of page 13 what the overall number was. On top of that, you'll see from the supplementaries there's been a further number of support and objections that are listed, and there was a further 3 received today. I don't have a copy of the supplementary, but...
Yes, so today there was an extra 26.
Okay, that's fine, thank you. And a great deal of discussion has centred around the community use aspect. So when we talk about community use, are we restricting that to one sector of the community, or does it always have to mean the whole community? What's the accepted definition?
Community use is any facility that benefits the wider community, so it can be quite broad in its definition, and what we've done in the assessment of this application, we accept that the proposed use would be a community use and therefore would comply with our policy for seeking the retention and indeed the new provision of community facilities.
Thank you. And you have touched on this, but it has proved to be quite an important point. How does the space, the sort of building area and the parking compare with that available at the Northbrooks building?
I will turn to, bear with me,
Page 17.
yeah. Thank you, Chair. So Northbrooks, based on the plans, has 77 square metres of space compared to the main hall of the proposed is 62 metres, but there are a further 3 small meeting rooms also proposed. So I would probably say the actual in-term provision is probably not too dissimilar. In terms of parking, I'm not sure what the level of parking is at Northbrooks, but you've seen what the figures are. We're looking at what's before us now, and there is 7 spaces proposed within the ownership boundary of the site.
Okay, and finally, and this is a tricky question, we have talked, and everybody, just about everybody who has spoken this evening has talked about parking, the number of parking spaces, etc. Are we in danger of being inconsistent in our expectation of parking spaces, available parking? Observations have been made about the available parking or not at the churches in the area, the community centre, the existing community centre, where there's virtually none. So are we being inconsistent?
You all right with that, Liz?
Yes, I'm fine with that. I mean, that's a matter for members to debate and discuss. What we have sought to do as officers is look at what the parking provision is and what the total number of cars could access that facility, which potentially could be 80. Now, I appreciate some of the speakers have said that it's only going to be for 15 minutes, potentially on a Friday, but in terms of the hours, if they operate within the hours of 10 to 6, we can't control anything within that. That would be an internal management issue. So the concern that we have as officers is that potentially that uplift of 80 vehicles accessing it could disperse quite a significant highway impact on the road network. And what we haven't had with the application is a traffic management plan or a traffic statement on how they might seek to mitigate that. Now, if that was an issue for members, there is an opportunity, I guess they could ask for that information to come forward, but we haven't had that information to overcome the concerns that we as officers have in terms of the impact on that surrounding road network.
Thank you.
Just, yeah, they did talk about community building, but that's some 200 or 300 metres away, and it is a community building, so I don't think that should be used as an overspill car park for this development. Yeah.
Here's the one on the left.
In your report, you mentioned that there isn't any current restrictions to parking in the local area, and at the moment the issues are contained. If that became out of control, couldn't highways then put in some parking management to reduce that risk? So double yellow lines or restrict parking in the area?
Yeah, potentially that would be down to the discretion of Essex County Council through Section 278 matters. They could look at having traffic regulations in place, which could be single yellow, double yellow, no waiting restrictions, chicanes or methods to control the parking. That would be at their discretion. They obviously have a number of processes and consultations that they would need to go through to go down that line, but that would be separate to the planning matter at hand.
And that, if necessary, could include sort of, resident permit parking and things like that, so residents weren't, I can't think of the word, but unable to park if they normally park.
Yeah. There's a whole host of things they could potentially look at within their gift as a highways authority. They would need to identify that, do relevant consultations and take it through their process. But yeah, there are things available to them.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, officers, for your presentation. I ask a question just based on page 19 of the report under informatives. It mentions that as a local planning authority, the council offers a pre-application service to applicants. Just as a question in good faith, because the presentation mentioned how there were technical deficiencies in the state of the applicant. In the application. Can I just confirm, is the pre-application service freely available to applicants? And also, finally, does the local planning authority feel is it content that it's reached out and engaged the applicant sufficiently to take up that service?
So, yeah, we welcome pre-application discussions with anyone wishing to engage in the planning service at Harlow. It's not free per se financially. There is a recouping cost of officer time to provide that level of service. It's in reality not for us to reach out to applicants, it's for applicants to reach out to us, to engage with us, and what we do is to, put due diligence in place and make sure that we can provide anyone who wishes to engage with the best advice in terms of the acceptability, but also levels of information that should come in with a planning application to try and alleviate any problems as it goes through the process. We in reality won't know what potentially may or may not come forward, so it has to be led by interested parties.
Thank you, Chair. As far as Potter Street itself is concerned, 38 parking places are going to be opposite Southern Way when that comes into place. You've got 40 plus behind Prentice Place. Okay, you have to pay for parking there, but there is parking available. You can use the space down by Mary Magdalene. So you have got approximately 78 plus within Potter Street where those cars could be put during that 1 hour of the prayer time on a Friday. When it comes to things like Eid, if they're coming from London, as has been said, you've got the Epping station, you've got buses that do come into Potter Street. They come from that end. They may not come from the other end, but they certainly come up at that end of Potter Street. So there are ways and means of getting around this. So has that, what I'm getting at is, if that was available, could this application be deferred? Because it seems to me that with the community frustrated because they haven't had communication with the mosque, in that sense of the word, there is still work that could be done on this application that could then potentially solve the issues that both sides have got for this application. Thanks, Chair.
I'm not sure we're in the business of finding car parking spaces for the applicant. It was for them to identify if they could, and you're assuming that none of the other spaces will be occupied. We can only deal with what we've got in front of us with the application site and the immediate surrounding area. Anybody else got questions, clarifications? No? Debate?
Thank you, Chair. Clearly, the application before us offers a real amenity benefit to the local community, and I particularly note that on page 13 of the report, there is a clear need identified for the multi-faith provision that is proposed. On the other hand, considering policy IN3, there are severe, as has been highlighted, technical deficiencies around parking, and there are real concerns around that. I suppose in this debate we're balancing those merits and the demerits, and so I welcome a debate, but I would note that I agree there is clearly a need, and I welcome, as we've heard from speakers, the opportunity for, as a multi-faith centre, cultural exchange and for openness and opportunity there. But very clearly in the report, the concerns around parking are severe, and I look forward to debating that.
Thank you, Chair. I think largely what has been highlighted in both the recommendations from officers and that is that there's potential need for the applicants to bring more data to support their application. I think the actual merits around the actual plan itself is acceptable, but there's still sort of the community, the parking, and other such biodiversity assessments that need to be done prior to it getting going. So I think that's where the technicality comes in, that we need more data, more reports to come with the application itself.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Thank you. I find it really difficult, this application. There is a need for community groups and the ability to work together as communities in this town, and we know that. What I find so difficult is that in this committee we approve planning for large housing developments with very little parking, and we are moving in a direction where we are looking for people to live in this town without cars. And when we have a really positive opportunity to have a multi-faith centre that will impact our community in a really positive way, the issues and the arguments are about parking. And we're using one argument to build developments that bring in money and saying we don't need parking, and on this one we're saying we do need parking, and I find that quite strange, to be honest. I find it difficult, and I feel like I will support the application on that basis.
Mr. Halcombe.
I still think of what I've just said previously, that there are both sides need what they need to have, but they're not coming at it together. If they combined community-wise, because that's what we're really dealing with here, it's a faith mosque situation, but it's a community faith. And that's what we all need. We need to have that input in a community. The parking can be resolved if it's not completely outside there, because that's what happened when we had the wonderful fair that we had this summer. People were, I think there was about 6 spaces that people were parking in the White Horse car park, but the other people were finding parking around the whole area, and that was where it went into its own. You've got to have that link, and I think that at the moment, as has also been said, we haven't had enough the travel plan, etc., has not been put forward in the way that it should have been. And that could still happen if we looked at this application again. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Oh. Mr. Morrison, you want another go, do you, Councillor?
An article. Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. The previous speaker used the expression both sides, and I think that is one of the difficulties for us. It's begun to feel like that. My impression, I could be wrong. I've been wrong before. There doesn't seem to have been an open, transparent conversation, a dialogue between the applicant and those around the applicant and members of the community. And I am convinced, but then I would be, that if there had been more communication, more exchanges of information and views and anxieties and all of that, then probably we would be at a healthier position. I happen to believe that talking really does help, usually. And in common with the previous speakers, including Councillor Sagers, we need to focus on not just the parking, though the parking has assumed a huge, huge significance. Parking is an issue, but so are the other aspects. There are three, actually, you will have noticed 3 items behind you or over to your left, Councillor Sagers. One is to do with the traffic management plan, and the other is to do with biodiversity. And while it may seem to people that we're making a lot of fuss about not very much, in fact, these are quite important issues. And this is kind of planning speak. But this is a planning application, so we have to deal with it thoroughly and properly. So it is, as has been suggested, it is open to the applicant to work on the areas that are at the moment not there, not simply deficient, but they're just not there yet. And maybe present another application.
Councillor Shepherd.
I am eager to speak again, only to reassure members of the public that as a committee we do thoroughly appraise the applications before us. Let's steer away from parking. Perhaps, again, just for the fullness of debate of this application, we could refer to policy IN2. I wasn't particularly moved by the talk of amenity per se, but I do think it's notable that IN2 makes reference to the types of road users that would be impacted by this development. And of course, thinking about cyclists, horse riders, pedestrians, even if we put the parking issue to one side, the change in the impact on the highway in this facility does carry a significant risk to vulnerable road users, and I think that is worth bearing in mind as we consider this application. And that, of course, again, is a material planning matter.
Thank you. Anybody else? No? Can I just say a couple of words, if that's okay? As Councillor Morrison pointed out, there's actually 3 reasons for refusal. Parking is the main one, but there's also the noise, disturbance and disruption, which will significantly distract from the living conditions of the occupiers and nearby dwellings, which is a very, very important one. You know, they live I know Potter Street quite well. I lived there for a short period of time. And it is a nice quiet area apart from the road, which is used as a shortcut up to the motorway. So if you've got possibly 50, 60 cars lined up on the road, it's going to cause absolute chaos. And apart from, all houses, noise of banging the doors, etc., etc. So I think the officers have got this about right. I'm an Essex County Council as well, and I think it's not down to Essex County Council to resolve parking issues for applicants. So with that, the recommendation is on page 19. The recommendation is to refuse permission for those 3 reasons which are outlined. All those in favour of the recommendation? All those against? One against. So that application has been refused.